Good morning, folks. The real Captain Kirk here, live from Weather Trends 360 studio here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It is the 15th of July, Monday morning. The big news last week was this past weekend was Hurricane Barry making landfall in central Louisiana. Underperformed a bit, hardly even call it a hurricane. It only a few hours there, but rainfall fortunately wasn't as widespread or as heavy as expected. Some models were saying upwards of 20 inches, and fortunately most of that stayed well off the coast. Lafayette, Louisiana area probably harder hit. Some rain, obviously pre-Barry, was even in New Orleans, but more in the 8 to 10 inch range as opposed to some of the models that were indicating 20 inch plus. So that's the good news. If we look at the broader Atlantic, we still have the big inhibiting factors right now. The Atlantic's pretty much very quiet. Is dust coming off of the Sahara of Africa. You can see this animation here over the next week or so. Again, lots of dust moving in, so that's an inhibiting factor, as is the wind shear across the Atlantic, due in part to the El Nino type conditions. So again, still expecting a average to slightly below average season, but still very worried about southeast Florida here for the remainder of the hurricane season. The big news here this week actually be the full moon here tomorrow night. We call it the thunder moon or the buck moon for this time of year. Unfortunately for the U.S., there will be a partial eclipse, but that won't be visible here. We'll be able to see it in Europe and Africa and parts of South America, but unfortunately not pretty much anywhere in the United States. We'll be able to see the partial lunar eclipse here. Looking at hot days, we're going to be talking about some really hot weather coming up here for the East Coast. But U.S. year to date, again, we're still trending coolest in 4 years in terms of hot days, 90 over 90, 24% less than last year, 3% above average. So making some headway here in July. Looking at the next 2 weeks for the U.S. overall, again, the hot spot will be the Northeast, but next 2 weeks, hot days down 12% versus last year, and again, the least since 2014, so 5 years, and about 14% below average nationally. So again, some hot weather here to talk about. This is a 14-day outlook here for New York City and here in WD360's headquarters in Bethlehem, but certainly looking some near 100 degree. It'll feel like 100 in New York City here this weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday is certainly going to be sweltering. So if your air conditioning is not working, now's a good time to make sure it's going to be working. Again, about a 3-4 day event here coming up later this week. Here in Bethlehem, we probably will top out in the mid 90s. We know Dallas, that's a cold day in Texas, so but we melt up here in the Northeast with temperatures like this. Looking at the weekend, just the Friday through Sunday time frame, 19th through the 21st. Again, nationally, it's similar to last year, 10th warmest in 30 years, driest in 3 years, 6th driest in 30 years, so not a terribly wet weekend coming. Live this time last year was actually the wettest in over 30 years, so extremely wet this weekend last year. Northeast, again, though, they're breaking the rule here, warmest in 8 years. So, again, the heat wave from the Virginia to Maine area, get ready because we'll be looking at some feel-like temperatures over 100 degrees, which is, again, hot for us here in the Northeast. Looking at this week overall, we'd say it's the coolest in 4 years nationally, 13th warmest in 30 years, but, again, very hot along the East Coast, hot in the Central Plains and cool in the Pacific Northwest. Some of that will probably be bleeding into the central U.S. here next week. Drier than last year nationally, and 10th wettest in 30 years for this week. Jumping ahead to next week, 22 through 28 July, so the last full week of July here. Maybe a bit overdone here in terms of the cooler weather moving into the central U.S. Certainly going to be cooler. Whether it's this cool, maybe not quite that. It's hard to do that in July, especially if there's not excessive rainfall in that area. But overall, probably the coolest in 6 years, 6th coolest in 30 years, and again, back to that number one wettest in 30. So again, the heat wave will be a 3-4 day event, probably cool off in the East Coast early part of next week, and then we may be building back some heat as we get into the very last weekend of July. Looking at the world overall here, again, this is 15 through 28 July, the next 2 weeks. Chart on the left is max temps versus average. So again, cool in the central U.S., warm on the coasts, west coast, east coast. Europe is warming up again across France, Germany, Spain. Russia still remains on the cool side. Maps on the right here, max temps versus last year. Again, so Europe, even though they're warming up, still quite a bit cooler than last year. Spain is the hot spot, again, both versus average and versus a year ago. Found out that our banners were up at the Lehigh Valley Zoo. We love to support the local community here, and so they put up some really cool banners here with these. Had to love the goat forecast 80% wrong, and the other goat's like, yep, heard that one. So they put some pretty cute banners up here at the zoo. So we took the little one, and she, of course, immediately, wait a second, I recognize that Weather Trends 360, Daddy's company. So she was looking at the giraffes. She's not terribly into the animals. Here she's giving the camels the side eye, like, what are you doing over there? And then we saw the giraffe and the zebras. Turtle was actually a little more interesting, but the best animal of all was this green slidey thing. So she loved this the most at the zoo. So with that, folks, we hope you have a great week, and we will be back here this time next week.